My name is Marcus. My grandmother moved in with us during the autumn of 2018 when her mind started to betray her. She was an ancient, 68, but the decline shocked everyone. She'd been the kind of woman who volunteered at church, remembered everyone's birthdays, hosted elaborate dinners. Growing up, I remember watching her organize things with military precision. Her kitchen was a museum of order. Her garden never had a weed out of place. When the first symptoms appeared, it was subtle. Confusion about dates, asking the same questions twice, misplacing her reading glasses constantly. The doctors ran tests, but the results were inconclusive. My parents invited her to stay at our house in Maple Street while they figured things out. The behavior changed gradually. Small things that seemed like part of aging. Then came the morning she woke up asking who had been talking in the attic. Nobody was up there. My mother was downstairs making coffee. My father was still asleep. I was in my room getting ready for work. When I assured her no one was there, she looked uncertain, almost betrayed. She said a woman's voice had been going on for nearly 45 minutes. It kept happening, multiple times a week. She'd mentioned hearing conversations, sometimes two people arguing, sometimes a single voice calling her name. Days would pass where she seemed fine. Then she'd suddenly pause mid-sentence and respond to someone we couldn't see, nodding like she was receiving information. Her eyes focused on empty space. My mom started wondering if it was early onset dementia. The hearing voices worried her more than the memory lapses. Then she started describing people in the house. A figure standing in the kitchen doorway. Someone at the top of the stairs. A shadow crossing the living room. She never gave specifics, no faces, no details about clothing. Just the awareness of movement, of presence. What struck me was her reaction. Not terror, irritation. Like she was annoyed at finding strangers in her home, and nobody else seemed to notice or care. But her habit shifted. She began sleeping with every light on. She stopped wanting to sit alone. If my mom left the room, Grandma followed. Some nights we'd find her awake at 3 a.m., standing in the kitchen saying she was listening. Listening for what, she couldn't explain. Then she started talking about the woman. Not multiple people anymore, a specific woman. She said the woman was checking on things, that she seemed unhappy. When we asked what she wanted, my grandmother had no answer. The weight of it crushed my mother. She was already exhausted from the care, medications, doctor's visits, the unpredictability of good days and bad days. My father worried constantly about costs. I found myself dreading coming home from work, which filled me with guilt because my grandmother hadn't done anything wrong. It was the situation that was suffocating. One evening stands out in my memory as the moment I genuinely became afraid. My parents had gone to pick up medicine from the pharmacy. I was home alone with her. She'd gone up to rest in the guest room around 2 in the afternoon. I was downstairs working on my laptop when I heard movement above me. Back and forth across the floorboards, the ceiling creaked with each step. Back and forth, then into the hallway, then back again. For several minutes straight, the pacing continued. I knew she moved around. She got up to use the bathroom, to get water. But this was different. The walking was constant, deliberate. The rhythm of it was strange. Then I heard what sounded like a second set of footsteps. That didn't make sense. My grandmother lived alone upstairs in that moment. There was no way there were two people walking around up there. When my parents returned, I mentioned it. My mom said she'd been asleep when they checked on her. Fully asleep, I figured I'd misheard something. Maybe the house settling. Maybe my imagination making connections that weren't there. Similar things happened over the next few weeks. Sounds I couldn't place. Movement from upstairs when I knew she was resting. Easy things to dismiss. I became skeptical of my own perceptions. The day it happened, my parents were at a medical appointment across town. I'd taken the day off work. It was just the two of us. I helped her with lunch, a sandwich, some fruit. We sat together watching television for a while. She seemed calm, content even. Around 2 o'clock, she said she was tired and went upstairs to lie down. 2 hours passed. I was reading when I started hearing sounds from above. Footsteps. Not the normal shuffle of someone moving from bed to bathroom. This was loud, rapid, back and forth across the room, into the hallway, back again. The pacing was relentless. I called up, asking if she was okay. No response. The footsteps continued. I climbed the stairs slowly. The hallway was dim, only light from the west-facing window at the far end. The carpet was worn thin down the middle from decades of the same pathway being walked. I could still hear the sounds coming from her room, like someone pacing frantically. I knocked on her door. The sounds stopped immediately. "Grandma, are you all right?" No answer. I opened the door. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, exactly where she would be if she'd been there for hours. Her breathing was normal. Her posture was calm. There was nothing about her physical state that explained the sounds I'd been hearing for the last 5 minutes. I asked if she needed anything. She didn't respond, just looked at me. And her expression, it was something I'd never seen on her face. My grandmother was always readable. Even sick, her emotions were transparent. But this look was alien. Her eyes were stretched so wide I could see the whites all around the iris. Her mouth hung slack. She wasn't blinking. I stepped into the room and asked if I should call someone. She kept staring. Then she spoke. The voice wasn't hers. It was deeper, masculine. A man's voice was coming out of my grandmother's mouth. The words were something like, "You shouldn't be up here." I can't swear to the exact phrasing because the moment felt unreal, like I was watching myself from outside my body. But it was definitely something close to that. She didn't move, still staring, still in that slack-jawed expression. The voice spoke again. Same tone, same unmistakable maleness. I don't remember what she said the second time. I was already backing toward the door, my legs moving without consulting my brain. I turned and walked into the hallway. That's when I heard sounds behind me. Footsteps, heavy and fast. I grabbed the railing and half fell down the first few steps because I became convinced someone was chasing me. I knew logically that my grandmother was still on the bed. She hadn't gotten up and sprinted across the room. But something was directly behind me. I could hear it. The footsteps were pounding in the hallway above and now in the stairwell. And I was running. I was terrified in a way I'd never experienced before that moment. Halfway down the stairs, I screamed. My phone was on the kitchen counter. I grabbed it and ran outside into the yard, my heart pounding so hard I thought my ribs might crack. I called my dad. I couldn't form complete sentences, but he understood. Something was wrong. I was terrified. They came home faster than should have been possible. When they checked upstairs, my grandmother was asleep in bed, the blanket pulled up to her chin, breathing peacefully. Completely peaceful. I felt insane. Actually insane. Later, when my mom asked her if she remembered talking to me, my grandmother looked confused. She barely recalled me checking on her. When my mom mentioned some of what I'd claimed she said, my grandmother's face flushed with embarrassment. She felt sorry that she couldn't remember. Over the following weeks and months, more things happened. Nights when she'd wake up having full conversations with someone in an empty room. Days when she mentioned seeing the woman standing in doorways, in corners, watching her. My mother came downstairs one evening looking ashen. She told my father that my grandmother had spent 15 minutes arguing with someone standing at the foot of her bed. Nobody was there. The house changed. Nobody wanted to go upstairs alone. My parents left lights on through the night. I found myself listening for footsteps even after everyone had gone to bed. That voice, it still appears in my dreams sometimes. That impossible, masculine voice coming from her body. By winter, my grandmother's health was declining rapidly. She stopped moving around as much, stopped talking as much, spent entire days just resting, staring at nothing. One afternoon, I sat beside her while she slept. She looked so fragile. I remember crying quietly because I could feel time running out. She passed away 3 weeks later in January. For months afterward, I didn't talk about what happened that day. What I heard, what I felt chasing me down those stairs. Some people would probably say it was supernatural. Some would say it was a manifestation of her illness, that my fear and stress created false perceptions. I only know what I experienced. I know that voice didn't belong to her. I know that whatever was behind me on those stairs was real enough to make me run for my life. The doctors never fully explained her behavior in those final months. My parents still don't talk about it, but we all remember. And I don't think any of us ever truly felt safe in that house again after that day. I grew up near Riverside Park, this run-down recreational area that everyone in town knew about, but nobody went to anymore. It had been closed for maintenance for years. Official notice on the gate, fence lined with no trespassing signs, but everybody knew there was a way in if you wanted in badly enough. The place had this sad, forgotten quality. A few rusted picnic structures, a pavilion with a caved-in roof, concrete foundations where a playground had been torn out decades ago, paint peeling from every surface, trees growing up through abandoned pathways. It looked more like a graveyard for a town's failed recreation than an actual park. This was summer of 2015. I was 17. 4 of us, myself, Derek, Lucas, and Chris, were bored and thought exploring the abandoned park might be interesting. Literally the only thing to do on a Wednesday night. The fence had gaps in it. People had been getting through for years. We pushed our bikes through and started walking around the property. The mosquitoes were absolutely brutal. Every 30 seconds, someone was slapping their neck and cursing. The park was bigger than it looked from the road. Once inside, it seemed to sprawl forever. Concrete pathways ran through sections of the grounds, though weeds had cracked most of them. We passed an old picnic area with splintered tables, a structure that might have been a bathhouse or storage shed. Walls covered in faded paint and graffiti from 2 decades ago. Toward the back of the park, there was a larger building. It looked like it might have been a recreation center at one point. Most of the windows were covered over. Graffiti covered every inch of the exterior. The door hung partially open, the hinge bent. That's where we saw the man. He came out of the building, and honestly, none of us really thought anything of it at first. People sometimes used abandoned places for various reasons. He started walking toward a road that bordered the far side of the property. From the distance we were at, I could only make out basics. Tall, thin. He wore something dark. His hair was long, tied back. He disappeared behind another structure. I mentioned it to the others because it was surprising someone else was there. Derek said, "Probably homeless or a drifter." We didn't think much of it and kept exploring. After another 30 minutes, we decided to head out. The novelty had worn off. The mosquitoes were getting worse. We started making our way back toward where we'd entered. As we were walking, we heard a car engine. Different roads ran around the park. We heard one pull up near where we'd seen the man earlier. The engine sounded nice, expensive. The kind of car you'd notice in our small town. A moment later, headlights swept across part of the property. We saw a gray sedan pull up to the building where the man had come from. Definitely not the kind of car that usually came to places like this. Polished, new-looking. The headlights stayed on. Someone came out of the building. The man we'd seen earlier, presumably. He walked directly to the passenger side and got in. The car drove away immediately. We joked about it. Something about a secret drug deal or a millionaire with unusual tastes. The whole thing seemed strange enough to be funny. We grabbed our bikes and started pedaling toward the park entrance. But the route took us past several more buildings, through areas where the trees had really taken over. Derek was talking about some movie he'd seen. Everything felt normal. Then Lucas stopped walking. He looked back toward the buildings. "I think somebody's behind us," he said quietly. All of us turned around. I couldn't see anything in the growing darkness. Lucas shrugged and started walking again, but I glanced over my shoulder to be sure. Someone was there. A figure standing near the corner of one of the buildings. It was the man we'd seen earlier. The distance was hard to judge in the fading light, but he wasn't extremely far away. He was just standing there, watching. I pointed him out. Everyone turned to look. He remained still for a few seconds. Then he turned and moved behind the building. The whole thing felt off. We kept walking, but we started noticing him again. Every few minutes, somebody would glance back and spot the figure somewhere else. Behind a smaller building, near a concrete foundation. He seemed to be moving whenever we weren't looking directly at him, appearing in different locations. As we got closer to the fence and the exit, Chris suddenly grabbed my arm and pointed. The figure was closer than before, much closer. But something was wrong with what we were seeing. "That's not a man," Chris whispered. We all stared at the figure. The long hair looked off, like it was attached on top rather than growing from the head. A wig, maybe. The shoulders were too broad for the body. The proportions were strange. The posture was weird. One of us, I think it was Derek, said quietly, "That's a person in a costume." We were all seeing the same thing now. Someone had apparently been following us around the park this entire time, and now they were just watching us from about 50 feet away. We moved quickly toward the fence, pushed our bikes through the opening and got onto the road. The figure didn't move immediately. It just stood there at the fence line. Then it started walking toward the same opening we'd used. We grabbed our bikes and started pedaling down the road. The park sat near some residential neighborhoods connected by tree-lined side streets. For a few minutes, the only sound was our bike tires on pavement. Chris said we were overreacting. Pointed out that we'd basically panicked because someone was wearing weird clothing. He had a point. Looking back with rational distance, he was probably right. But then Lucas looked behind us. He didn't say anything, just stopped talking mid-sentence and looked back. We all turned. The figure was there, about half a block behind us. Same strange posture, same unsettling proportions. How was he keeping up with us? Derek said. We'd left the park minutes ago. We'd been riding the entire time. But there wasn't much traffic that night, and the figure looked identical to the one we just escaped from. We pedaled faster. The road curved through a section lined with trees on both sides and a couple of empty lots. We went maybe a quarter mile. The figure appeared again. This time on the side of the road ahead of us. It was moving toward the road. Go, go, go! Someone shouted. We accelerated, racing past the figure. For just a moment, I got a better look. The face was completely obscured, either covered or the features were somehow indistinct. The wig hung awkwardly on what was clearly a man's head. The clothing didn't match the body type. We kept pedaling. Our neighborhood was maybe 2 miles from the park. We lived in the same general area, but on different streets. For the next mile, we kept checking over our shoulders. The figure didn't appear again. Maybe there had actually been multiple people. Maybe it was a group of guys trying to mess with us. That made more sense than the alternative, someone impossibly keeping pace with bikes over that distance. By the time we reached the first subdivision, we'd convinced ourselves it had been a prank. Maybe several people or someone using the trees and buildings to create the illusion of appearing in multiple places. That's what we told ourselves. But I never went back to Riverside Park. And years later, I still think about that figure on the road. I still remember the proportions that didn't quite match, the way it moved, how it kept appearing no matter how far we rode. Sometimes I wonder if it really was just kids trying to scare us. Other times, I'm not so sure.